Hi everyone, we're about to start. All right. So, hi everybody, welcome back to the Greater Sydney Landcare webinar series. It's webinar number 7, and we're going to be learning all about birds in the Sydney region. We've got birdwatching guru Mark Fuller with us tonight, and he'll be speaking with us soon. First, I want to just start with the acknowledgement of country and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands of Greater Sydney. I'm on Darug country myself. I want to recognise the elders past and present, and I acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and contribution they make to the Greater Sydney region as the traditional land carers. I extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people joining us tonight. So there is an incredible amount of wildlife around our neighbourhoods, even for those in built-up areas. And Mark's going to teach us about some of the birds that we might see flying around and some good techniques for spotting them. It's also National Bird Week coming up in October. So you can use your new knowledge and skills to spot some birds and record them on the Aussie Backyard Bird Count. So this is one of Australia's biggest citizen science events, and it helps to record birds and bird species around the country, which greatly assists conservation efforts. All right, so some housekeeping. We've got a Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. You can click on there to ask questions, and we'll come back to that at the end of Mark's presentation. And I'll hand over to Mark. Thanks very much.
Lovely, thank you, Bronwyn. So I'm not sure what it looks like to everybody else. Hopefully you can see my screen and maybe my little face. I'm not sure. I'm quite dark there. So yeah, so I'm a bit disappointed that we're not all locked down to 5 kilometres now. We're able to explore the greater LGAs. The reason I say that, obviously, it's tongue-in-cheek, is the fact that this 5 kilometre radius helped everybody to try to focus on their areas, on the green space that's in their areas. We're actually ripped off because in the UK it was a 5-mile radius, so we worked in kilometres, so we got less space to explore. But it's amazing just how much you can find within your area. I'm just checking, am I okay, Bonnie? Is this all working? I can't tell. Sorry if it's unprofessional. Everything's okay? I'll continue on anyway, carry on regardless. So
yes, that's looking good, Mark.
Yeah, all good. All right then. So what I'd suggest to people, I mean, you can look at your LGA now, but if you get a Google map, you can see all the roads. Now that image there, that's where I lived in Oakhurst, and it was along Bells Creek Road is a little thing along the middle there. You can see Plumpton Park at the bottom, and that big green strip is the Western Sydney Parklands. So I've got some of that up above, the one in the red border. There's Colby Nature Reserve. So these are the little areas. You're looking for things like golf courses, where there might be creek lines, the only places that aren't built on really. And if you walk around and you go and explore them, what you do is you stand there and you listen, and the chances are you'll find some small birds, and you'll be able to get quite a few birds in your area. Now, like I say, I was, I think, quoted as being an expert, and I'm not, but I know someone that is. And this guy, his name's Edwin Vella, and when I go out with him, I'll find 40 species, he'll have 44. I'll have 50, he'll have 55. He hears things that I don't, and he immediately recognises them, and he's just like a machine. So he lives near where I was living in Blacktown, in Acacia Gardens, Quakers Hill there. So again, quite built up, but he was able to access part of the Western Sydney Parklands, a sewage works, a golf course, and a few other bits and pieces. and he managed to get 86 species within one day. And I knew what he was up to, because the following weekend he had got 90 species, and I knew what was coming. And yeah, lo and behold, the very next week he had an RDO on a Friday and he made 100 species. So this was in Quakers Hill. This is Western Sydney, the old remnants of Cumberland Plain woodland, the wetlands and things like this. This network of habitats can really produce good results. He actually went out spotlighting afterwards and found a tawny frogmouth. So he ended up with 101. So it's this thing of, do bird watchers live in areas with lots of birds, or are the birds there because they're all getting picked up by the bird watchers that live there? And I think there's a lot of that going on, that all the good records over the last few months will be within 5Ks of all the best bird watchers' houses, because they're hearing the things and seeing the things there. So like I say, artificial or natural, this checkerboard effect of habitats will get you your different birds. So the thing I always advocate is that people use their ears as much as their eyes, and start small. So you wake up in the morning, you know what a rainbow lorikeet sounds like. You might hear a magpie or a raven going wah, wah, over the top. And you'll be amazed that once you actually start tuning in and listening to these birds, you can hear them from probably a kilometre away. And of course, they can hear each other. There's a soap opera going on. There's this invisible world going on. And by tuning in with your ears and learning what they are, you get to know what's going on all around you. You get to see this world. So I'll just, sorry, I've got to. Okay, so suburban birds. These are the ones that are doing really well. Unfortunately, it's the larger aggressive species that do really well. They're adaptable, so they're not so put out by shopping centres or just our sort of manufactured parklands. So the obvious one is the noisy miner. And it's interesting, they're an aggressive honeyeater, but all honeyeaters are aggressive, even the tiny little scarlet honeyeater. But these ones have been able to get it all worked out, and every suburban eucalypt patch, especially if there's a field and some lawns, the way that we like our parklands, it suits the noisy miner perfectly. They form a big colony and they drive off small birds, and they attack large birds. They're really good at picking up raptors, so that's what I use them for. And within a colony of noisy miners, you'll often find a pair of grey butcher birds. Now, the funny thing about this is you can see the butcher bird, he's got that hooked beak, and he'll eat eggs, he'll eat chicks, even fully grown small birds like wrens and finches and things like that. Very, very aggressive. But they don't rob the nests or attack the young of the noisy miners. And by the same token, the noisy miners won't drive them off or won't argue with them. So they've got this symbiotic relationship, which is great for them two birds, but of course it just completely wipes out any little thornbills, pardalotes, scrub wrens or anything like this. And this is what we see. A lot of people are losing their small birds because we've got these birds working together to basically rule the roost, as it were. A lot of people, when you're beginning, you hear the noisy miner, M-I-N-E-R, which is a honeyeater, and the common miner, completely different, sounds similar, but you can see it's M-Y-N-A. And this was called the Indian miner, obviously from Asia, introduced. And I hear people saying, oh, you know, they're a problem. You know, we should maybe kill them, trap them, or get rid of them. Well, they're not the problem. You know, they've adapted to habitat. They love our car parks. They love our shopping centres. So the more we build like that, the more that we're going to get. A classic case, Western Sydney Parklands down at Bungarraby. They've built the zoo there, so of course loads of food. They've got the car park there as well, and it's now absolutely chock-a-block with common miners. There were other things there before all that went in, but you put that infrastructure in, and that's the result. Rainbow lorikeets are another classic example. When everyone started planting grevilleas and bottlebrush, these big showy flowers, that's what they like. They'll get in there, they'll fight off the others. And when you get a rainbow lorikeet, you get familiar with that, you hear that. Then the next thing to maybe look out for and listen out for when you've got, say, flowering eucalypts is musk lorikeets seem to be getting more common in Sydney. And this is what happens. This is how you become a twitcher, that you've got the rainbow, then you might see or hear a musk. So the next one you're after is maybe a little lorikeet or a scaly-breasted lorikeet. And so you've got the easy ones, the most common ones, and then you start looking for the ones that are a bit harder to find within that same group. So that's another way to build up your birds, to build up your knowledge. Australian raven, he's a big black bird. And again, you know, people say, oh, they're called crows. Well, no. And the best, you know, there's three types of raven in Australia. There's the Australian raven, which is in Sydney. If you start moving out west, Southern Highlands, you could get little ravens, which have a different call. And then if you go to Tasmania, there's no Australian ravens there. They're just forest ravens. So again, they've all got their areas, their habitat, and what their distribution is. And this is how it works. A classic with the crows, the Teresian crow and the little crow are the crow species of Australia. And I was up with my friend Edwin, like I say, he's an expert, and he said, oh, Mark, that crow's calling your name there. And we were north of Newcastle. And I thought, he's an expert. He knows they're called ravens. And there was this bird going, Mark, 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 Mark. And I realised that is the call of the Teresian crow. So now, of course, it's very easy for me as I go north of Newcastle and I hear what I think looks like a raven, sounds a bit like a raven, but it's calling my name. I now know that's a Teresian crow. So again, this is our hanging around with people with knowledge. It really helps you to sort of build your own knowledge up. And of course, everyone knows the bin chicken, the Australian white ibis. Is very similar to the African sacred ibis, which is the one that you see in the hieroglyphs. So 2,000 years ago, this ancient god, this ibis-headed god was, you know, master of, you know, life and death and everything in between. And now here we are, the poor sod's been relegated to a bin chicken. So I think it's a classic case of how the mighty have fallen there. So, yeah, but they were introduced in the 1970s to Taronga Zoo. And that Sydney population got a foothold, but there's also been some crossover because they are naturally a wetland bird, and the inland birds have come over to Sydney probably in times of drought, and so there is that toing and froing. And again, if you want to collect the set, you start off with the Australian ibis. You then start looking around for the straw-necked ibis, which is a bit more out towards the edges around Richmond and the fields of peri-urban lands. And then once you've got those two, you look in wetlands, some really nice swampy areas, and you find the glossy ibis. All three occur in Sydney, and that's probably the rarest. You know, the glossy is usually the last one you'll get. He's the least common of Sydney. So that's the Australian white ibis is the one. And then you go to the duck pond. And again, it's this thing of just having a closer look at what's there. A lot of people will see the water birds just swimming on there and think, oh yeah, there's a couple of ducks. But, you know, you start to work out how many species there are by ticking off the Pacific black duck, the Australian wood duck. You might have teal there, and then you work out, is that a chestnut teal or is it a grey teal? So already you're up to 4 species. There could be those brown ducks, hardheads. They were called white eyes. I mean, this is another funny thing that I hang around with a lot of old birdos, and the wood duck, you can see his mane there. They call it the maned goose. It's not actually a duck as such. You can see a different shaped bill, so it's a slightly different family. The hardhead was called a white eye. Only the male has a white eye, and the black duck was called the painted duck. So Pacific black duck. So the names change as well. So this is funny when you're sort of, you know, getting out with different people and stuff. Coots and moorhens, again, you look at that beak and it's pretty obvious. They're even a different colour, like one's more of a browny colour, one's more of a bluey colour. And then, of course, you might have a purple swamp hen wandering around. And once you've got those three, then you start looking for things like their other relatives, the buff-banded rail. They're a bit more secretive. You'll find them in reed beds. And then if you're really lucky, you start to get onto the crakes. And again, a really lovely bit of wetland with a nice reed bed. And these are tiny little things. They're very small, about a quarter of the size, spotless crakes. Often heard, but never seen. They just dart around in the reed beds and stay in thick vegetation. So they might be birds that are there, but are not picked up. And then swimming along, you could have some cormorants. Little blacks are quite common. Little pied cormorant, so he's a black and white one. And then along with that, you've got a great cormorant, which is a bigger one. And you've got a pied cormorant, a large one, but they generally stick to the coastline. But in Sydney, if you go to Sydney Olympic Park, you'll find all four species of cormorant there. If that's in your LGA now, or if it was in your 5K zone, you would be able to get all four species of cormorant. And you could probably pick up a darter as well, which is very similar looking to a cormorant, but it's a different family. So again, it's that thing of lumping them together in their families and then looking at the subtle differences between each species. Herons and egrets. So the egrets are the white ones, and most people would know a white-faced heron. He's the most likely heron that you're likely to see. There is also the white-necked heron, a much larger bird, which is mainly white on the front, and it's got this sort of dark green, almost black wings, larger bird, and they're more nomadic. So again, they might be inland, and then once it gets drought inland, you'll find that they start hitting Sydney. They wander off far and wide, whereas a white-faced heron can have quite a small range. And then even with the egrets, they're very difficult. Well, they are when you get started. It's all about size. So you start off with the great egret, which is, of course, the biggest, intermediate, as it says, and then little. So that's quite easy. But then you have the cattle egret as well, which is hangs around cows. I mean, that's where it gets its names. Why does it hang around cows? Because as they walk around fields, they're kicking up all the insects and it's snapping up the insects. So it's associated with cattle. So again, they've all got their different ways of feeding and their different diets and habitats. So this is the world that you start to enter into when you start bird watching and observing these birds and looking for them. So that's the white-faced heron, and like I say, egrets. Spoonbills are another one. And again, you have a royal spoonbill, which has got a nice big black bill, or the yellow-billed spoonbill. And again, as the name suggests, they've got this really nice paddle-shaped bill, and that's another specialised way of feeding to sift through for invertebrates in the muddy water and stuff. So you've got your water birds, you've got your new birds. Raptors, yeah, so birds of prey, hawks, eagles, falcons, kites and harriers, all that stuff. A lot of people struggle with these. The most telling way is quite often the wing shape. You don't always get to see the colour, so it could be the silhouette as well, and a bit of size. So how do you look for a raptor? I always say 10 o'clock in the morning. That's raptor o'clock. And surprise, surprise, quite often when I'm out walking and it's just before 10 or just after 10, I'm not sure with daylight savings, but it's basically that time of the day when the thermals are starting to warm up. Reptiles are fairly active. They've all warmed up as well. And the small birds are all getting quiet as well. They're just settling down a bit more. They're not so busy. 9 times out of 10, that's when the raptor's going to come along. And as I mentioned earlier, noisy miners are excellent at finding raptors. So you've got that one there, the Pacific bazar, again called the crested hawk. Now, unlike the other raptors, he actually feeds on large insects like stick insects, phasmids and things like that. So they often will hang around in a canopy, and they're quite. I had one over Plumpton Park, which again is that relates to that map earlier. Nearly all these photographs were taken within that 5K zone. And what had happened was, first time I saw it, I thought, this is fantastic. How comes I've got one of these? And I took some photographs or whatever, watched it, went back home. When I came back the following day, I walked over the park and I could hear the noisy miners going off. I walked over and found it again. And I'd done that for 3 or 4 days running for that Pacific bazza. The following winter, same thing happened. I'd walk over there, hear the noisy miners going off, and found the bazza, who again stayed for 3 or 4 days. So all of a sudden, and I think this happened for about 3 or 4 years, that every winter a bazza would come into Plumpton Park, hang around, clean up all the large stick insects, and I was able to find them because the noisy miners showed me their locations. Brown goshawks, 9 times out of 10, if you see a hawk flying around, when I say a hawk, I'm talking about they've got like a small head, long tails, and they quite often will have a rounded wing. It's normally a brown goshawk. The other one that's a bit smaller is the collared sparrowhawk, and even experts have trouble telling those apart. There's a collared sparrowhawk is a bit smaller and has a square tail, but you get large collared sparrowhawks. The females can be quite large, and the brown goshawk males, the male is smaller than the female, can be quite small. So there's that crossover period. And then if you look at enough birds, you start seeing things where they're missing feathers or worn feathers. So that square tail, round tail doesn't always help either. So, and quite often you've only got a short amount of time and it's a long distance away. So keep looking, just keep getting the hang of it. Don't be afraid to be wrong, but just eventually you'll get there. And the other hawk, other than the sparrowhawk and the brown goshawk, is a grey goshawk, which is like a smooth grey all over. And there's a white version, which is pretty much one of the most beautiful birds ever. The first time I saw one, I thought it was a cockatoo. I was in a rainforest, and it struck me as unusual that there was this one single large white bird in a rainforest, and it was a beautiful white phase grey goshawk. Absolutely lovely. And then Nanking kestrel, he's a hoverer. You've only got him and the black-shouldered kite are probably the two small birds that hover, and you'll often see them again over grasslands on roadside verges. The Nanking kestrel is a falcon, one of the small falcons. So the other one would be a hobby of a similar size, and he looks like a peregrine, but he's quite long and thin. Obviously, peregrine falcons, very common. Well, I say very common. They're urban. They're in the city centre because, of course, they eat pigeons and things like that. But will you know if one's flying over? Well, if you're listening out for noisy miner alarm calls, yes, you will. But they're very fast, very high, and you'd be amazed at how they're moving around all the time. Brown falcon is another one, and I even had a black falcon again in that strip along Bells Creek. So he turned up just at the time that I had about 5 magpie nests, and all the young magpies were fledging and they were all learning to fly. And then surprise, surprise, this black falcon turned up out of nowhere, and it was a bird I'd been looking for far and wide, and it actually turned up in my own backyard. So I was wrapped when that happened. Little eagle, it's quite easy you can see it's got what they call an M shape. You make out that M shape. That's a light phase little eagle. You also get a darker one. And even white-bellied sea eagles, they move far and wide. So again, it's a lot of these raptors use the sky above you. So it might be going from Sydney Olympic Park out to Hawkesbury. For them, that's nothing once they get on a thermal. So again, if it's going over your house, if you're out there looking for that, you'll pick up on that. So it's this stuff that's around, but you've just got to notice it. And again, of course, obviously the wedge-tailed eagle. Black-shouldered kite, he's a different little kite. Like I say, he's quite often you'll see him hovering. He's quite common, but the whistling kite is more that sort of typical type kite, quite a large bird, almost, like a small eagle. And the other one, you can see on that whistling kite, the bit I always pick up are those 2 paler streaks just before the black primaries, like the black tips of the wings there. And the other one that is becoming more common in Sydney is a square-tailed kite. And it's a similar looking, but it's got rufous and black and white and a square tail. Unless, of course, he's lost feathers. So this is what we get. The ones I haven't put in, I haven't put the harriers, swamp harriers and spotted harriers. They're not that common. Swamp harriers maybe in some wetlands. And I don't know if you know the harrier jump jet, flies along, drops down, vertical takeoff, and that's a harrier just over the top of the long grass or top of a reed bed and then straight down onto its prey. It hasn't got a chance. They do nice aerobatics as they drop down and nice long legs to pick stuff up. So that's they're the harriers. So again, that thing of, is it a hawk? Is it a falcon? Just, you know, you narrow it down, and that's where photography comes in, because if you're not sure, there's plenty of things like Australian bird identification where you can put up even a blurry picture, and someone would be able to tell what sort of bird that is from, like I say, the shape or something like that. So summer's here. It's just that time. Well, it's actually equinox. So we're getting to that nice time now where the days are getting longer, nights are getting shorter. So happy equinox. And the song that we always hear is this one. So I haven't heard mine yet. No doubt we'll get the coel calling. And again, it's this other thing of hearing and not seeing. Most of you would have heard a coel. They're very loud, but you try looking at one and they fly off very quickly. It's amazing how much, they're quite a large bird, and it's amazing how a big bird can hide in a small amount of foliage. So you can see mum and dad, the male is the black one, female is the dark brown spotted one. They're in my palm trees in my backyard. And then they had a young one. And this is what you'll get at the end of summer. You might hear a constant cheep, 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 cheep. And just, it drives you crazy. It goes on all day. Look for it. And what you'll see is a couple of really harassed red wattle birds and this huge chick. So you can see that's on my bird bath there in my front yard. So yeah, I had the coels breeding around. And then the other one, of course, I heard my first one at the beginning of the week, and I always think of it as like a Fred Flintstone bird. It's like it's a cuckoo on steroids, that one. I mean, if you're going to use a pied currawong, which in itself is a big, you know, nasty bird, if you're going to use that to raise your chicks, you've got to be pretty bold. And you can see from the picture there that it almost looks like it could eat it. They're enormous. And so both of the coel and the channel-billed cuckoo weren't around in Sydney during the 60s and before that. And they've expanded their range, whereas a lot of those other cuckoos like fantail cuckoo, shining bronze cuckoo, pallid cuckoo, they're in the peri-urban areas, or they're sort of looking for bush birds. And again, they've declined with the bush birds. And these guys have come in with the expansion of the coel and the red wattle birds, those larger aggressive birds that I was talking earlier that are now doing rather well. And just interesting fact, the reason it's called a channel bill cuckoo, I don't know if you know, it's got like grooves in its large bill along the side. And that's where they eat a lot of berries. They, like I say, they'll spend the winter up in the New Guinea highlands and they'll eat all these fruits and berries. And it's the same, for the same reason as when you have a sword, you have that channel in the sword for the blood to run down. It's for the juice. So it's for all the juice of the berries. So, you know, there's nothing you can't learn about birds. I've been doing it for quite a while and I still get surprised about things that I find out about them. So that's the channel-billed cuckoo, and that's why it's called the channel-billed cuckoo. It's got that thin channel in its bill. And then finally we get to the LBJs, like I say, these are the ones quite often, I think they're like the canary in the coal mine. These are in towns as you get more urbanisations. These are quite often the small birds that you won't see so much. These are the relatively common ones. So again, fairy wrens. When you look at them, you might see small brown birds flickering around very quickly. Fairy wrens have got long tails, so it's that shape. Something like a scrub wren is a bit larger, and they'll call from deep in cover. They're a bit more louder, a bit more aggressive, whereas that fairy wren has that really nice, sweet, high-pitched call. I mean, you can see the male there. It's very easy to tell from the female that's got the red beak, but that male goes brown in the winter, so that makes it a bit harder. They've got a black beak. So the superb fairy wren is one. The other one, of course, is, well, not of course, but the other one is the variegated fairy wren. And again, very similar. The call, they're a bit more chattery. And after what, again, it's all experience. You just get used to seeing superb fairy wrens, and all of a sudden you see one that just looks a bit different or just sounds a bit different. And normally you're not in this lawn, grassy area. You're in somewhere where it's a bit more like by a river, and it's a bit more sticks and slightly different habitat, and that will be the variegated fairy wren, which is different. So again, you start fairy wren, and then is it a superb or is it a variegated? Well, if you start travelling out of Sydney, then it's even further. So white-browed scrub wren, he's the most, again, and especially if you're in the eastern suburbs, the best, one of the few places that are left alone are the watercourses. They can't build houses on creeks, so you've got these drainage lines, and those drainage lines are quite often overgrown, and this is where you'll find fairy wrens and scrub wrens in those little, and it's not always pristine habitat, but it's got thick cover, might be privet even, or African olive, but the scrub wrens are in there. Now, I live up in the mountains, and I heard some scrub wrens the other day, and I thought, oh yeah, white-browed scrub wrens. And I went down there, and I was really pleased because it was a yellow-throated scrub wren, and there was also a large-billed scrub wren. And these are more rainforesty birds, and that was the habitat I was in. And I thought, okay, well, that's really good. You can get them, say, places like Royal National Park and other areas within Sydney, but generally, if you're in the town or in the suburbs, you're more likely to get the white-browed scrub wren. So again, it's that thing of collecting the set. Talking of sets, thornbills. There's heaps of thornbills. And again, the first thing you'll see with a thornbill is a small, round, fluffy bird, generally. Pointy little bill. That one's the brown one. You can see his brown colour. He's got striations on the front there. And there's also a striated thornbill that has striations on the front. Again, it goes into the brown thornbill has a beautiful song. The striated thornbill is very high pitched, so high pitched, it's very difficult. Well, I'm a bit older, so it's almost impossible for me to hear. But they have completely different calls. And then the other one I get along creek lines in Blacktown is probably the yellow thornbill. Bright yellow, but like I say, if they're in dark vegetated places, you can't always get to see the colour. So again, you might be looking at the shape and just get a few little details as you go. Classic LBJ is the brown gerygony, and I wanted to include a gerygony because that one always gets people. Jerry John gerygony. So that's the brown gerygony, and although he looks plain, he's actually got an eye stripe there, and sometimes that grey that's on his face can almost look like a lilac-y colour. So they have got their own little subtle features. You get to know them. One of the best tips I heard is that they fly around saying, which is it, which is it? So if you hear a bird saying, which is it, which is it? He's got this squeaky little scratchy call, that's the brown gerygony. Again, more common in Western Sydney during the winter months, but in the summer, they're down in rainforest, down in those wetter areas. So again, in inner Sydney, in the inner west, they'll probably be there all year round. The other gerygony, and I've heard a few, there are some of us, there's the white-throated gerygony that we get over in the western sort of part of Blacktown. Red-browed finch. Again, quite often you might see finches and fairy wrens together. So you've got these blobby, almost sparrow-like type shape, chunky birds flying around with these small birds with long tails. So that might be the way to pick them out when you first see them at a distance. Then, you know, you might get the detail and see the red-brown. You think, okay, that's lovely, a red-browed finch. And then you'll want to see a double-barred finch. Then you might want to see a chestnut-breasted manakin, which again, manakins and finches, very similar. So again, you get the common ones and then you start collecting the set. Zebra finches, very rare, but there is quite a healthy population around the Penrith area. So again, there's just something about the habitat in there, that mixture of peri-urban, little bit of open woodland that favours the what bird is it? The zebra finch. So again, it's related to habitat, and this is how I like to find my birds. Silver eyes, they're relatively common, even in the inner west and in Sydney, and especially in wintertime, because what happens there is that the birds come up from Tasmania. It's too cold down there, not much happening, and they'll come up and they'll join the Sydney birds, and they'll feed on things like privet and African olive. So not really that good for anyone trying to stop, you know, privet spreading, but the silver eyes love them and gorge on them. And yeah, keep an ear out for those, and you won't have much trouble finding the silver eyes amongst the other birds. Now, I don't know how we're going for time, but that's the end of my my presentation. Have I spoke too quickly, gone too fast? How are we going? So I might stop sharing, and maybe we go into Q&A. I don't know.
Yeah, sure. So we'll get some Q&A going, Mark.
How are we going for time? Are we?
Yeah, all good.
All
Thank
good?
you so much.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
All right. So we've got one question from Roger, and he's asking, do you do tours?
Not tours so much. I do walks and talks, obviously not so much now, but I do one every year with North Sydney. I think I've done some with Landcare. I'll be doing, I think, bush care tours with Landcare as well, out in Western Sydney. I've done tours with Cumberland Bird Observers. They're a really good one to have. So I might just, if I stop sharing, I might just.
Yeah, sure. And do you advertise those on your website, Mark, or anything when you're doing tours?
No, I'm a terrible businessman. I'm a great bird watcher, but I'm a terrible businessman, and maybe I should, but they're just things that have come about. So, I mean, to me, I'd advise joining a bird club. Depending on where you are, there's the Greenway Birdos, which is one of the smaller clubs, like I say, CBOC or Birding New South Wales. Obviously, all this stuff's up in the air now. So yeah, I might just
Okay.
go on chat.
All right.
Here we go. We've got some others.
Yep. So another question is from Bella Smith. Which app do you prefer for amateur bird watchers?
Is this to? There's basically one that I'll use is the Morecambe, and that's where I was playing the calls, but the drawings aren't good there. You mentioned earlier, or was it you that mentioned earlier about the backyard bird watch?
Yeah, the Aussie backyard bird count.
I found that to be really good. It's one of the best things BirdLife have done. Unfortunately, I think that your records automatically go through to bird data and that you can't keep ones yourself. So the one I use is one called Bird Journal from the UK, and I'll go in and I'll put in the birds that I've observed. And the good thing is you can add libraries like frogs, mammals, and things like that.
What about that Michael Morecambe e-guide to Australian birds? Is that?
Yes, that's right. That's that one there. I think, I don't know if you can see it with the regent bowerbird on it. Yeah, I use that. Good for calls. And again, if you're just learning, that's fine. Of course, the best thing I'd advise is get one of my my bird guides, my photo guides, because that sort of breaks it down into just, you know, I think there's 70 species, and you can get those from Cumberland Bird Observers.
Okay, great. Maybe we can send out those links after, yeah, by email. Yeah. Cool. Bella also says thank you. That's from Bella and David from Swamp Care, Gargary Swamp Care up in the mountain.
Oh yeah, I know Bella and David.
Great. This is from Bev. In Field of Mars and Riverglade reserves over the last 2 weeks have been tiny LBJs, not is it Gerrigone or brown thornbill? Gerrigone. Yeah. Any ideas?
Not Gerrigone or brown thornbill. They could be, well, to me, the scrub wrens are going to be the first one you're going to come across. They're a little bit larger than the Gerrigones and thornbills. I mean, you've got things like yellow-faced honeyeaters. It depends how brown they are and how small they are. But Field of Mars. See, what you do is, my way is always to bring it down. So you look at Field of Mars, you'll have a species list for Field of Mars, or you should have, this is where I start, and then you work from that. It's probably going to be something on that. And again, so yeah, female fairy wrens, there might be a lot of fairy wrens. Like I say, we're getting to the time now that some of the early breeders are starting to have young birds hop around. So if it's a white-browed scrub wren, it won't have the pronounced brows, it'll be young birds. And again, that's where the calls will change as well. So I'd say listen to the call, look at the shape, and then work it out from there. And it'll probably be something reasonable within the 5 or 10 rather than something rare. And once you've got one, you'll know it all the time there.
All right, so, great. Next question is just a bit from an anonymous attendee. Why do the male wrens change colour in winter?
So it's all about hormones, and what happens is that they colour up, and they call it an eclipse when they're halfway between now and then. They only need to look bright and showy to get the females. During the winter, if they're looking bright and showy, it's easier for them to get eaten. So it makes sense for them to go back to brown and to blend in a bit more. And what happens is in the springtime, as they start to get that colour, that testosterone rises up, and like a lot of small birds, the fairy wrens are quite promiscuous. So they'll get up, they'll breed, and they'll all show off their colours, and then they'll go back, and then they'll be more sort of muted through the winter. If you see a brightly coloured male in the winter, that means he's about 4 years old. The older males, the real dominant males, do keep their colour all year round, but not many birds die of old age. So those birds are really, you know, the granddads of the birds, really. Like I say, most of them last 4 or 5 years, tops.
Okay, great. Next is from Claire. How common is Horsefields bronze cuckoo, which we saw today in Garrigal National Park?
Not that common, but if you're in a national park, if you've got lots of sort of swampy areas and grasslands, I think we've got one above that as well. Yeah, so the Horsefields bronze cuckoos, again, this was a classic case of Cumberland Land Conservancy have got a property in Mulgoa, and if you remember a few years ago, we had that drought about 2 or 3 years ago, and this is where there was an influx of Horsefields bronze cuckoos. I saw 5 of them at Riverston out in Blacktown, and what I had was a pipit, Australasian pipit, which is a ground nester, and the Horsefields like ground nesting birds. And we wanted these pipits to breed. We were looking forward to that. And I saw these pipits hopping around, and the Horsefields bronze cuckoo was following them around. So it was obviously trying to find out where their nest was. So it was a bit of a bittersweet moment that you've got a nice, because they're quite attractive. So they can fluctuate. They call it an eruption, that when you've got the dry western conditions, west of the divide, you'll get a lot more Horsefields bronze cuckoos in Sydney. They come over there. Yeah, I saw there was a question not before that.
Yeah, just a comment that from Marg saying we are locked down now, but have in the past visited Penrith and Emu Plains and seen various finches.
Yeah, that Emu Plains is probably the best place in Sydney for finches. You're definitely going to get a red brow. You're pretty guaranteed a double barred. You'll also get the zebra finches. You'll get chestnut-breasted manakins, and you'll also get the introduced European goldfinch, which is a beautiful bird as well. So it's finch heaven over there. It's a really nice spot.
Great. And this is from Regina. What are the little black birds that flit around the inner harbour wharves? They are very fast.
That would be the swallows, I'd say, the blue-black swallows that zip around and they're zipping over. Swallows are quite an easy bird, because in the fact that they only really need buildings to nesting, and they'll eat mosquitoes a lot of the times. So they really don't need that much in the way of habitat. They're again quite adaptable for buildings, for the city. So they're a good urban bird, even though you do get them on grasslands as well, but they're in amongst the cities.
Okay. This one is from Maki. Why does hybrid occur? So, for example, crimson rosella crossed with eastern rosella, or little corella and long-billed corella. Do those hybrid birds call differently? Are they attractive to genuine species?
Yeah, so hybridization quite often happens when there's an overlap of different sort of zonal areas. But I think hybridization really occurs in captive birds, and this is where people breed birds. So I suppose the reason why it occurs is because birds want to breed, and if they can't, find the one you love the one you're with. Sorry, that's an old song. So yeah, and I think that's the thing. Probably one of the worst ones for that is like the mallard. We get birds that get endangered because an introduced mallard will breed with nearly every Australian duck, given half the chance. So it's that sort of strong breeding thing that will happen. And I think that the calls would probably be halfway in between two. And I think you'll normally find hybridization very rarely creates a population of hybridization. It's generally one or two individuals, one or two generations, maybe of some sort of fluke or borderline type thing, unless you're talking about captive birds again, which is, that's a specialist sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and this is from Eva. She's saying it's an amazing talk. Thank you so much, Mark. She's wondering if you can share an interesting fact about sulphur-crested cockatoos from your observation.
I don't like them. They're absolutely full of character. They are brilliant. They crack me up. But I've got a gang around me because I'm up in the mountains, and here's another thing that might be contentious is I'll put out some seed for king parrots. They love it, and brown cuckoo doves and crimson rosellas. And as soon as the big white boys turn up, the seed goes away. I don't want to encourage them. So they're very intelligent. They're very adaptable. And in the mountains, they never actually used to be here as much. They were quite sort of rare species. And what we used to have more of were the beautiful little gang cockatoos, the little grey cockatoos, and the males have that bright pink head. And I'm pretty sure that the sulphur-crested cockatoos have displaced a lot of the gangs, you know, through nesting in hollows. So they're a big one.
Okay. So Roger's just asking, what is your website?
So that's avianation.com.au. So I've got it typed out. Can I put this on, or am I challenged? Hang on, let me just links. It's again, I've done it myself, and it's not the best.
Well, that's it. I can send out.
Yeah, avianation. Yeah, how to win friends and avianate people. That's it.
I can send out that website, Mark,
yeah,
with the video after the presentation as well.
there we go. Oops, no, that's mine. Can everyone see that? Is that avianation?
All right. And just another one from Bella. We had a tiny black and white honeyeater, we think, and it fanned its tail a lot and chatted for ages. Not sure what it was in Hazelbrook.
So the black and white ones are usually the New Holland honeyeater. They have a flash of red, a flash of yellow on their wing. I don't know if it was that one. Again, the black and white. Again, small ones. I'm thinking there's the white-naped honeyeater that has a black head and a white front, but it's got a green back. Anything else, I'm not sure. Was it a honeyeater? Could it have been something like a flycatcher? And again, they're sort of like a medium, so almost like a willy wagtail type bird, but again, a different shape, different behaviour. So that's another black and white bird. Hang on a minute, my cat's being a pain.
Okay. Roger's just suggested it might be a white-cheeked honeyeater. So
white-cheeked, yeah, you get both in the mountains. I know Bella's in the mountains. So to me, I probably see sort of 10 New Hollands for every one white cheek, very similar looking to each other.
Mm-hmm. All right. They've just said that bird she was wondering about is not a scrub wren, it's smaller.
Okay. Yeah, so you're going for a small bird. I don't know. I'm stumped because I would go brown Gerigony, female fairy wren, or the brown thornbill. Any reason? And I suppose the thing is, why isn't it a brown thornbill, or why isn't it a brown Gerigony? How does it differ from those two? So we might go with that. I think Mackie's, is it Mackie, has mentioned Merlin Bird ID. I haven't used that, and I've heard a lot of good things about that. So
that's another recommendation.
Yeah, that's another one for people to go.
Yep. So yeah, great. Lots of thank yous for a wonderful presentation, Mark. So from Rosalind and Linda. And Roger said here that he's met you at a fox hunt. He actually asked you if you had any comments about foxes.
Well, I'm baiting at the moment. It's spring, and again, it's like this invisible world that's going on. So with the birds, using my ears is what's going on during the day. With foxes, I mean, I love foxes, but they're a real problem for ground nesting birds, for reptiles and things like this. So it's more in that broader habitat. So I've been lucky. I've already got one fox today. And just before everyone gets up in arms, I actually use what they call a canid pest ejector, which is a metal spike with a little pin to it. So the meaty bait has to be pulled by the fox. It won't get non-target animals. And 1080 is actually one of the best things for native animals. Like, I think something like a raven has to eat 20 different baits before, you know, it's actually specifically for placental mammals. So no good for foxes and for humans, but for a lot of the native wildlife, they do have a tolerance for it.
Okay, great. Yes, so there's, I think Mark mentioned Penrith and Emu Plains for the finches. Emu green, she said here, is good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a well-known place.
Yeah. Kay's put up your website there, so avianation.com.au.
Okay.
Anybody wants to get on there.
I've got to do it up.
Yeah, Claire's just talking about the cockatoos again.
Yeah, I just noticed with Bella, she's saying it might be a flycatcher or grey fantail. So there we go.
Okay,
yeah.
Great. And then, yeah, some more thanks again. Looking forward to some links. So I'll send out the video to everyone who attended with your website and maybe some links to some of those apps. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that'd be good.
All right, great. All right. So thanks very much, Mark. That was fantastic.
Okay, what is IG? Do you post on IG?
And there's another one. Do you post on Instagram?
Oh, I do, but it's mainly, I think I put a picture of my breakfast on there this morning. So I'm not up with all this stuff. Normally I'm busy out bird watching. So, you know, I do a bit of this technology stuff, but I'm not the best for that.
Yeah. All right. Okay, so yeah, thanks so much, Mark.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was great to hear about all our little feathered friends. I'm not sure if people knew how many birds there are, particularly in our urban areas.
Yeah, he wants to see lifers. Lifers are really easy to see when you're first starting off.
Yeah, exactly.
Once you've done it for a few years, they get harder. That's when you end up going
further.
So that's good.
All right, great.
Excellent, some great comments there.
So yeah, I might close it off there. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Bronwyn.
Yeah, and just to let you know, so Greater Sydney Landcare, we've been busy planting trees throughout Greater Sydney, and that's through our Creating Canopies project, which is in partnership with Landcare New South Wales and funded through the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment. So we're planting 100,000 trees throughout Greater Sydney by the end of 2022. So that's not only creating habitat for the birds we've just been talking about and other wildlife, it's also helping to cool the city and creating some great recreational space for residents. So if you are a landholder and you're interested in planting some trees, you can plant hundreds or thousands. Just get in contact with us and our project team will help you out. We've also got volunteers that can come and help get those trees in the ground. Speaking of volunteers, if you want to volunteer and get out and plant some trees, particularly after lockdown, you might want to get outside and connect to nature a little bit. Yeah, we've got tree planting events regularly, probably starting up next year actually. So just check our website, it's greatersydneylandcare.org, or keep an eye on our Facebook or Instagram as well. All right. So thanks very much for joining us. Next week, we've got another webinar, and that's going to be about the urban heat issues in Western Sydney. And we'll be joined by Western Sydney organisation of council, regional organisation of councils. So they'll be talking about those issues and the solutions to those, including tree planting. All right, take care and hope to see you again. Good night.
Good night.